Welcome back to another episode of the House Husband Diaries. As always, I am your host, Carter C., and today we are talking about, or I'm sharing, my second hike along the Appalachian Trail. It's quite the experience. It actually took place in March, and let's see, a quick recap would be the first hike I did was just uh, completely off the cuff, if you will. My buddy asked to, if since I was going to be visiting, if we just wanted to drive an hour over to Amicalola Falls State Park and do the AT approach trail. I said sure. We overnighted in the winter, February night. It was like the 20th or something. It was freezing. Got down well below 32 degrees. Icicles everywhere. It was quite the experience, but I knew that I could survive. I knew that I could do it. So I had a lot of confidence going into trip number two and not being prepared, having a really heavy pack, bringing three sets of clothing for a one night, 2 day hiking trip. I knew I could cut a lot of weight for this second trip, and I did. So I cut a sleeping bag, a couple pounds off of a sleeping bag. Instead of bringing my buddy's 0 degree, I brought my 25 degree old REI bag. Obviously, didn't bring nearly as much on the clothes front, and so we had kind of a better idea. And the hope was to get about 30 miles. If I could get more than 30 miles, that would be great to keep on track. But the minimum was 30 miles, and that would be there's a parking lot on the about a mile from the Springer Mountain summit, and you can either start the Appalachian Trail at Amicalola Falls State Park and do the approach trail, or you can go back and they call it Big Stamp Gap, and there's a parking lot and you can park there. You can hike the mile or so up to the summit of Springer Mountain and then turn around and walk backwards. Uh, so we said, well, we had already walked to that parking lot the first overnight trip in February, so that's where we wanted to start. Um, and so anyway, so we made it there, and we did that to Mountain Crossings, and it's Neil Gap or Neil's Gap. I've seen it both, and so some people in the official have Neil. Some I've seen it, everywhere. You can say this famous person or this famous trail says Neil, and this one says Neil's, whatever. So I call it Mountain Crossings because that's easier and nobody's questioning that name. But anyway, uh, so the first day we did Big Stamp Gap to Cooper Gap. And what happened was, as I was planning it, sorry to go back, as I was planning it with my buddy, and we were trying to figure out, okay, we could do about 10 miles a day. We know that. And that's what we had done basically from Amicalola Falls up to the summit, past the summit, and back. And so we figured, okay, 10 miles we're okay with. And that was really, we didn't start early in the morning when we did the approach trail. And so really what ended up happening was we got into some weather issues, and they were calling for lightning, and my buddy wasn't stoked about that at all. He was pretty nervous, and so he was kind of wanting to cancel the whole thing. And I said, no, my wife only gives me a few days a month to hike, and I need to get miles, and if I cancel this month's trip, then I'll find an excuse to cancel next month's trip, and I'll never get underway and really move this goal along or move towards achieving this goal. And so I was hell bent on making as many miles as I could, as I could walk, weather dependent, be safe, weather dependent. But so what we decided to do, the way the weather was coming in, was the first day we would just do a day hike. We'd have day packs, go super light, and we'd get as many miles as we could get. And we found that from Big Stamp Gap to Cooper Gap was a little over 11 miles. And we would just do that the afternoon. So I'd drive all the way down to North Georgia, and we'd set up cars. So we'd drive to Cooper Gap, and then and then we'd leave one car, and then we'd hop in the other car, and we'd drive around to Big Stamp Gap, and so we did that, and we got on the trail. I want to say about 2:30 ish, and it took us about 5 hours, and we hiked the 11.3, I believe, or so miles to Cooper Gap, and then drove the hour back around to pick up cars and made it in dark. And that was on a Wednesday, and that next Thursday, the next day, it poured like crazy. Huge lightning storm, tons of rain. We were very thankful that we were off trail that day. People were getting off trail in droves. Some people were out there in shelters and stuff. And man, that Friday morning after we had the day off, which was nice to rest our legs and get used to the hiking, as we were driving from the town he lives in North Georgia over to Mountain Crossings, we went up. I guess it's Highway 19, and at the bottom of the mountain, it's not Blood Mountain. That's right next to Mountain Crossings, but maybe it is the bottom of Blood Mountain. Whatever that is, it's like 8 miles down from Mountain Crossings. There's an RV park right on the mountain creek, and as we were coming up to it, and then after we passed it, there were mudslides. There was mud over the roads where it washed away during the rain. But we got up to that RV park, and there were a number of campers and RVs that had been washed away. That mountain stream overflowed during the night at some point and just took a number of the campers and RVs with it, and there was trash strewn about everywhere, and just a gaping hole of where these campers had been, and a whole bunch of trash because they had been thrashed in the middle of the night. So, I never checked the news, but I hope that the people, they were watching the stream and they had like a community watch or something that night. I hope there weren't people in those RVs and campers. They got washed away. It was terrible. And so as we were driving that morning, seeing all of this damage, we weren't even sure we were going to be able to make it onto the trail to keep hiking. So we were thinking maybe we would be washed out and we'd just have 11 miles and I'd have to go home. But we made it up to Mountain Crossings, and then we made it back down the dirt road to get to Cooper Gap. And so we parked, and we started the 20 or so miles, it's about 19 miles, I guess, from Cooper Gap to Mountain Crossings. And so we spent so much time shuttling. It was something that I'll talk about, things I've learned, but in the next video. But there was so much water on trail. When we got on trail, we finally got there. We came across a stream where I don't know if there had been a bridge across it and the bridge had been washed over, or washed out, or if there were just rocks that had, sometimes they'll place large rocks in the stream, and you can just hop and step from one to the other, and it makes sort of like a bridge. I don't know what is supposed to be the crossing there. I think should have been some big rocks, but the water level was so high, you couldn't, you had to either wade across, take your shoes off, as I did, or there was a huge tree that had fallen over and was pretty high. I'd say, probably 10, 12 feet above the water, and or the top of it maybe, and but it was thick, and anyway, so my buddy decides he's gonna shimmy and climb across, and I got video of that. I don't know if I can put it in, figure out how to put it in on this video, but he shimmied across that tree, and I just thought, that's the last thing I want to do with a 35-pound-ish pack, and tear my pants on the tree up there or something. And we're just getting started. I'm just gonna take my socks and shoes off and ford the river. And my buddy just said, I don't want to get my feet wet. And then it wasn't probably a mile or two further down the trail, we came across another stream that was overflowing, and we couldn't find a way across, like a tree or something. So my buddy capitulated, and he had to take his shoes off and socks, and so I did the same. And actually, while I was trying to find my footing before I took my shoes off, I actually stepped into something that I thought was solid and sunk, and got my foot and sock and shoe completely soaked. And I was taking them off anyway, but I ended up with a couple of blisters, and I wonder if how much of that was because I got my socks and shoes wet, and then I had to hike, 10 more miles or so, 20 more miles for the rest of the way in the next day or two. But yeah, basically what we had what we had planned out for where we were going to get water, where we were going to camp. I mean, this was all new to both of us, and so we didn't really know how to plan hikes. I mean, I've already talked about and shared a video on how I plan hikes now, but that also is because I've planned additional hikes from what I've learned on this hike and what I learned on my third hike. And at this point, it was my first real hike and camping trip, and we just weren't really sure how much water there was going to be on trail. And I can tell you that after 9 inches of rain, water comes out of the mountain everywhere. There's water everywhere. And I mean, we had to walk through water on the trail. It was crazy. But because we weren't sure and I wanted to be safe rather than sorry, I filled up my 2 liters, 1 liter water bottles, 2 1-liter water bottles. I filled up a 3-liter water filtration system. So I carried 11 pounds of water for about 7.5 miles, because we were supposed to camp at Lance Creek, and they have tent pads there. And one of the things that I learned was that on these little maps that I use, that I've shown in other videos or will show in upcoming videos, on those maps they have a little water symbol, a little water drop, and so there was no water droplet on this Lance Creek tent site. Well, what I found out was if it says creek in the name, it's actually a creek. It's not just an old dried up creek, what have you. There's actually water there. That's why I guess there's tent sites there, campsites there, is because there is a constant supply of water, and that's where people should camp. But at the time I didn't know that, and since it didn't have a little water droplet there, the last known water spot that I saw before camping was about 7.5 miles before Lance Creek, and I filled up and carried 11 pounds of water with me until we got to Lance Creek. And then when we got to Lance Creek, we realized that it was all full. People had beat us there. And I just didn't know that people hiking the Appalachian Trail the majority of people prefer to get up early in the morning, 5, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, break camp early, get their miles in, and they're oftentimes stopping by 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon and setting up their campsite, their tent and everything. I just don't work as well under that scenario. I like to kind of take my time, get up by 7ish. You kind of wake up earlier anyway, and then just take my time making breakfast, breaking down camp, and I'll get on trail maybe 8:30, maybe 9. I don't really care, and then hike later in the evening, especially as the summer months come and it gets later and later. I don't see any reason to stop at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, again, I was a newbie and didn't know much, and so all the tent sites, all the campsites were taken, and my buddy and I were kind of tired and getting some blisters and been carrying 11 pounds of water, and so we just trudged on. We just said, okay, well, we'll just see where we'll end up, and it wasn't maybe a mile or so. It wasn't too far. There was a mountaintop after you leave Lance Creek, and so it was just a beautiful campsite, and the sun was setting. We had maybe an hour, and we set up camp and made dinner and got to watch the sunset, and it was a good thing we had all that water. Of course, it would have been great to fill up at Lance Creek and only carry water maybe a half mile or a mile up to the mountaintop instead of carrying it all that way. But it was nice to have all that extra water, and we were fine and good to go. I will also say we ran into a trail ridge runner and told us that our original plan was to make it further. I don't remember the name of the shelter that we were planning on trying to make, but it was in an area where they want you to have a bear canister or require it. And we didn't have a bear canister with us, and so we camped outside of that area before we made it to that destination. But we wouldn't have made it there. We were hiking slower due to having to cross the streams and the rivers and all of the muddy trail. And so just really learning in this hike that the best laid plans, right, of mice and men. You plan your hike as best you can, and then you just take what comes that day. Sometimes it's nature, sometimes it's weather, sometimes it's it's your muscles, and sometimes it's you, or sometimes it's your hiking partner, whatever it is. And so just kind of have a number of different sites available, a number of different options, and that's what we did. So we planned, we found a nice campsite, and then the next day, we got up and made it across Blood Mountain that morning. We didn't have very far to go, 6, 7, 8 miles, and it was cool, man. Blood Mountain was foggy. It was late morning when we made it. They were calling for maybe some rain, but it was just really foggy, and you couldn't see anything out when you looked out from Blood Mountain. But even the shelter up there and the trees, it was just really eerie. It gave it a cool Blood Mountain feel with such a crazy, terrible name. But that was a great experience to be up at Blood Mountain and then come down and do that harrowing descent, and then end up at Mountain Crossings, which I had heard of. It was a great place to stop for this hike, and then a great place to start my next hike, which I'll talk about in another video. So I think a couple of things, and I'll do another video on what I've learned so far in my 2 hikes on the Appalachian Trail. But I think one of the things is, as I got done with this second hike, what I realized is that I want to push myself and do more miles. It frustrated me that I had a rain delay and a washout day and only could do 30 miles because I knew I could do more. And then the other thing that I've learned, and I'll talk about more, is I just really learned, and it solidified that my hiking partner, my buddy for that hike, for the first 2 hikes really, just isn't really into quote unquote crushing miles. And they just would rather do shorter hikes and enjoy the scenery more and kind of set up camp earlier. And so really just learning, everybody, each individual's sort of just personal desire and enjoyment for them to get the most out of their hike and for me to get the most out of mine. So overall, hike number 2 was fantastic. Like I said, it was from Big Stamp Gap, which is basically the Springer Mountain parking area to Mountain Crossings. And it was a great hike. I would highly recommend it to anyone that's starting. The first couple of miles after Springer Mountain are nice, pretty flat, and just a great hike. So that was hike number 2 along the Appalachian Trail, or at least my experiences. And let me know in the comments below if you've done that hike, what you thought of it, your experiences, if you've ever seen it, if you were out there when it was that rainy. Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe. Thanks so much for watching this episode of the House Husband Diaries. Until next time, have a great day.